Good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome from my part here to the latest ÖFG Peaceful Change lecture. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome Filip Milačić, who is sitting here next to me. And just a few words about his work. He's at the Friedrich Ebert Foundation and the Central European University in Budapest and here in Vienna. Publishes widely on nationalism and democracy, so published 2 books about it. Writes, also has a more practical side, so writes commentaries in major newspapers. Neue Zürcher Zeitung is one of them, the Standard another one. Was a visiting scholar at many interesting and prestigious places. One of them, Institute of the Human Sciences here in Vienna. Another one is Yale University. And today he's going to talk about political entrepreneurs versus democracy, abandoning democracy for the nation. So in other words, when it comes to this peaceful change, or maybe not that peaceful change, we're very much looking inside the state today and zooming in on political processes that are very much happening, I think, in front of our eyes. So please join me in welcoming Filip to the DA. Filip, then you have the word, maybe 30 minutes or so. And it's a very active audience, so they're probably going to have a lot of questions.
I hope so. First of all, thanks for invitation. It's always great to see you, Markus, and I'm glad I'm here to talk about a topic that I must say was for a while neglected because we thought we are living in a post-national world, that nationalism doesn't matter at all. But unfortunately, we realized that this is not the case. However, I'm not only dealing with nationalism, I try to deal also with the consequences and implications of nationalism, especially on democracy. And then, of course, democracy is, to paraphrase Donald Trump, most beautiful word. Of course, he said this for the tariffs, but I think democracy is much more suitable to explain it like this, because we all almost, it's at least in Europe here, but in also many parts of the world, we are living in democracies. However, many of these democracies have been struggling lately, and there is a lot of talk about the crisis of democracy. I'm not one of those who would classify current developments as a crisis, but definitely there are challenges. But why? The question is, why are many democracies facing challenges? So could it be that people are not in favor of democracy anymore as a form of government, that they are more authoritarian-minded? Surveys are saying no. So if you analyze major surveys across the world, you will see that democracy is still very much valued and cherished by majorities in many countries, including those countries that are marked by what we call democratic backsliding, meaning deteriorations with respect to many democratic norms and principles. So, in essence, we are dealing with 2 contradictory realities. So one is people cherish and value democracy. The other is they vote for politicians who are subverting democracy. And then they are also re-electing them. So why? Me and my colleagues, we've done surveys in 3 of these countries that are known as examples of democratic backsliding: Hungary, Poland, and Serbia. So we ask ourselves the question, could it be that those voters of these parties, like Fidesz, SNS in Serbia, or PiS in Poland, maybe they are not valuing democracy anymore? Maybe they vote for them because of their authoritarian policies? No. As you can see here, also, when we only analyze the voters of these parties, we see that they also cherish democracy very much. Then our second question was, maybe they don't know that Orban and Kaczynski and Vučić are doing something undemocratic in the first place, because the key difference between authoritarian-minded leaders nowadays and those 40, 50 years ago is that those in the 60s and 70s, they were proud of being authoritarians. They were saying, we don't like democracy, and they wore it as a badge of honor. So they're saying, we think authoritarianism is a better system. Nowadays, aspiring authoritarians they are never saying, you will never read their statements saying, we don't like democracy, we are subverting democracy. No, you will see statements like, we are enhancing democracy, we are renovating democracy, we are improving democracy. So just to remind you what happened last week in Munich when US Vice President J.D. Vance, he criticized Europeans for alleged attacks on democracy by excluding far-right parties from the government. So you see here different narrative. So then we thought maybe, you know, the voters of Fidesz and SNS or PIS, maybe they don't know what is actually democracy and what isn't. And then we asked them different questions to measure the so-called democratic competence, to see whether they are democratically competent or not. And we saw they are democratically competent, at least majority of them. So they know what democracy is and what isn't. Nevertheless, they vote for these parties that are subverting democracy. So then again, the question is why? And I think there are many explanations out there, and I think nationalism is one explanation that is rather under-theorized and neglected. Because if here added two quotes from two authors, Vahudova and Fish, who are saying that whenever those authoritarian-minded leaders were subverting democracy, they were doing it in order to protect the interests of the nation or to protect the nation itself. So you see here these nationalist appeals that were used as justification to subvert democracy. This is why I think that whenever we have a case where authoritarian-minded leaders used nationalist appeals to justify their actions, we must classify it as nationalism. But what are these appeals actually? So they were appeals that were related usually to two key markers of any nation, and this is why I think we should call it nationalism. Firstly, it was about limited community, meaning they were saying that they were protecting ethnic and cultural composition of the nation. And second, it's about sovereignty, which is another important marker of every nation. So there were appeals about safeguarding nation's territorial integrity and security. However, these appeals were also combined with so-called majoritarian appeals that were rooted in nationalism. So what do I mean by this? All these parties, and I will go into details, were elected in elections, and they had a majority. But then they were claiming they are not only representing majority, they were representing true people. So they were representing the others are not true people, we are true people, and this definition of true people is based on exclusive criteria like ethnicity or religion. So they are saying that they are not here exhibiting the will of the majority, they are exhibiting will of the nation, and this is why they are entitled to do whatever they want by simply having majority in the parliament. So this is why these appeals I classify as nationalism, because again, they are related to the key markers of nationalism, which is somehow missing in the literature, because has been a lot of talk about nationalism, but we still do not know how to operationalize this relationship between nationalism, and democracy. So I'm trying to do this by answering three questions. So how are nationalist appeals subverting democracy? Why are voters accepting this? Because don't forget, voters have the last word in a democracy. We as voters, we have the last word in a democracy. And third, when are they successful? So under what circumstances are these nationalist elites successful in subverting democracy? And then I use 5 cases because you have here countries that are very different and you have, and I say very different, I mean different democratic histories, different democratic traditions, economic development, then linkages to the Western pro-democracy actors, the existence of religious or ethnic divisions, and so on. But they have one common thing. This is the subversion of democracy by political elites in the name of the nation. However, we also have interesting outcomes here, because we have the same approach, but we have different outcomes. Whereas, for example, in Serbia, Turkey, and Hungary, democracy broke down, while in Israel and in Poland, it only eroded to democracy of a lower quality. So, and even in Poland, as you say, in 2023, they managed to reverse the trend. So, this is another puzzle, and which I'm trying to analyze. So here the question is, why is this the case? Of course, there are many explanations there, but I will only focus on the nationalism. And how do I do all this? Is I have done several surveys with colleagues in many of these countries, and also conducted 29 semi-structured interviews with people who were directly involved in these processes. So then I come back to the first question. So how is democracy subverted in the name of the nation? I argue that political actors subverted democracy, of course, not only by appealing to the nation-related issues, but they were also subverting three key elements of democracy. So what are three key elements of democracy? Civil liberties, checks and balances, and free and fair elections. So here I can start with so-called rhetorical attacks, because we need to differentiate here between rhetorical attacks and practical subversion of democracy. Because rhetorical attacks you will find in many countries, and this basically means vilification of the opposition. So opposition and critical media and other critical actors in the society, so they are branded as state enemies, enemies of the people, and so on and so on. So, however, these rhetorical attacks do not always remain also only at the rhetorical level. So we have also targeted legislation, which means that civil liberties are directly curtailed, again, always using nation and protecting nation and safeguarding the nation as an excuse. So one example here that is very common is so-called foreign agents law. So many of you heard this. So it's targeting civil society actors, basically by portraying them as tools of foreign forces. Again, we need to do this because they are actually tools of foreign forces, and by doing this, we are protecting the nation. But also other civil liberties were targeted. So I give you here some examples. For example, freedom of expression. You have in some countries legislation that prohibits the statements that harm the nation, or even freedom of assembly was sometimes curtailed in order to protect the nation, and so on and so on. Also attacks on checks and balances. Well, so what are checks and balances? It's, of course, the division in a functioning democracy between a legislative, executive, and judiciary branch. So if I'm a politician and I'm, of course, at the head of the executive, and I'm claiming that I am champion of national interests, that I'm protecting the nation, that I'm safeguarding the nation, this is my appeal, this is how I personalize power, and this is how I accumulate power in my hands. And then I use this legitimacy to establish a full control over my party. And this is how then I establish the control over the parliament. Because those MPs are then loyal to me, I control them completely, and then we are dealing with rubber stamp parliaments. Because parliament is not practicing its oversight role. However, this is also important because then if I control the parliament, then I can also control the nominating process with respect to judiciary. So then I can purge judiciary, and then I can nominate loyalists. Or in the third case, sometimes we have, for example, in Serbia, unlike in Poland or Hungary, there was no purge of judiciary because the judges simply deferred to the executive amid its broad appeal. So also you have this kind of a mechanism starting with a leader who portray himself, and I say himself because they're all men, to kind of safeguard the nation, and he's the custodian of national interests, but in order to save the nation, he needs to personalize power, accumulate power, and then we have institutionalization of backsliding through the party, parliament, and in the end, judiciary. However, these are so-called liberal elements of democracy, meaning civil liberties and checks and balances. But in some of these cases, you see the subversion of the freedom and fairness of elections with nationalist appeals. So, give you one example, is from Turkey, that you have misuse of state resources just for those who, according to the government, belong to the people. So social benefits are being provided only to those who belong to the people, meaning those who the government, the AKP, defines as the people. Others are excluded. Also, you have examples in Turkey and in Serbia that you have these grand projects like the airport in Istanbul or Belgrade on water in Belgrade, who are projected as, you know, the country is rising and it's very powerful again. But in essence, this is just the cover to channel the funds and to maintain patronage networks. In some of these cases, we have also here the change of the electoral legislation in order to favor the incumbent party, again, and always justified as safeguarding the nation and safeguarding the national interest. So this would be basically in few sentences, or a bit more than few, how they are doing it, what are concretely attacking, which democratic norms and principles are being attacked, and what are the justifications. So, to summarize this first question, how, I'll just show you one tweet, because in essence, this is it. So, I'm not analyzing United States, but in essence, this is it. So, he who saves his country does not violate any law. So this means that if you are protecting your nation, if you are safeguarding the interests of the nation, you are allowed to do anything. So this is how they are justifying backsliding and attacks on democratic norms and principles. But then the question will be a very logical question, can it happen anywhere? So if I'm a politician, or maybe you will be and you're elected, and then you just need to say, I am protecting my country and safeguarding the national identity, and then I can entrench myself in power. Unlikely. It's not that easy. So because there is one other important actor here in this equation, we voters. So why are voters accepting this kind of subversion of democracy in 5 of these countries that I analyzed? And this is my explanation. So, firstly, we forget that that people have a fundamental need to belong to groups. There was a lot of talk about individualization of our societies in the last couple of decades, but we forget that people are members of groups. And one of the important groups is the nation. Nation is for many, if you read many surveys, you will see that in many countries around the world, nation is still one of the most important groups, if not the most important group. However, like I said, we are members of many groups. So why is one group, membership in one group becomes important at some point of time, and it basically defines my political behavior? Now, so-called political entrepreneurs enter the stage, like the ones I mentioned in the first part. So they are portraying the nation as being under threat by one specific outgroup, and we know that if people think that their group is under threat, we know that for them safeguarding the group's interest is the primary goal, and they are willing to tolerate a lot if they are convinced that this is in the interest of the group and its interest. So basically, what I'm saying here, I'm basing my explanation on a lot of work done in social psychology and political psychology. However, I must remind you, my aim is here not to offer a fully robust explanation. I want to offer enough evidence for the plausibility of this explanation, because I think this is something that we are also missing, that we need to include voters in this equation, and that this narrative about protecting the nation only works if you previously convince voters that the nation is under threat. So in essence, this is a 3-step procedure. So you have political entrepreneurs who are saying that nation is under threat. And if it resonates, so maybe it doesn't resonate, because you never know if it resonates with the population, then we should observe evidence that people do perceive this outgroup as a threat, and then there is a rise of outgroup resentment and also of the strengthening of in-group sentiment. So if it resonates, and if it resonates, in the end it means that they are willing to tolerate undemocratic behavior for the sake of the nation. So that when Trump says he doesn't violate any law because he's saving the country, people will accept this. Or in case of my research, which is the research for the book that I'm doing, Erdogan, Vučić, Kaczynski, Netanyahu, and Orban. So let's see if this is the case. So again, this is a three-step procedure. So step one is they identify a threat. They identify a threat to the nation, and then they spread the narrative about nation being under threat. So in Poland and Hungary, it was very similar. The beginning, Muslim immigrants, and then later, LGBTQ community. In Serbia, it was the West because of the Kosovo issue. In Israel, it was Israeli Arabs, and in Turkey, there were many outgroups. Firstly, secular elites, then Kurds, and then later also the West. So here, what I added to this slide is this measurement of that in the party programs, in the party platforms, we see that this narrative is being pushed in many of these countries. However, for the sake of the time, I will not show you all the data for all 5 countries. So I will focus on 2, on Poland and on Hungary. So, okay, we have the spreading of the narrative. We have the narrative of the political elites, but does it resonate with the people? So do people feel threatened? And can we see the strengthening of this in-group sentiment? Very much. So if you analyze Poland and Hungary, you will see that in 2016 and 2017, let me remind you that this threat narrative started in 2015. You see that great majority of Poles and Hungarians see Muslim refugees as a threat, as a major threat. Also, in case of Poland, you see here that more than 50% of voters of the then ruling PiS see also gender and LGBT as a threat, much more than Russia. So I added Russia here so that you can see how this narrative actually very much resonated. Also, with respect to LGBT community, we see that there is an increase, not as much as with respect to Muslim immigrants, but we see also that the narrative about LGBT community being a threat to the nation in these 2 countries, we see that it resonated. So it resonated because in both of these countries, according to Eurobarometer, majority of population is against the rights for LGBT community. Also, we see that this in-group strengthening. So very clearly, if you look at the data here for Poland and Hungary, we see this sentiment that is against immigrants of different race and ethnic group. So we see that parallelly to this narrative, we see the change, the shifts in the public opinion. So the societies are becoming more I would say, they are becoming more inward-looking. So they see immigrants and LGBT as threats to the nation, and then they are also more reluctant to accept outsiders to become insiders. So we see here this strengthening of the in-group sentiment in both of these countries. So then, to summarize, there is a narrative there about the threat to the nation, and it resonates. So does this mean that then Poles and Hungarians were willing to sacrifice democracy for these issues? And here I done some experimental surveys with colleagues. So just to give you a bit of idea what we've done, there were no this was not a classical survey with questions that you usually ask about the support for democracy and how much you cherish and value democracy. We've done experiments. So we've asked respondents what do they value more? Do they value more democratic norms and principles or some interests? So we asked them about immigration, about environment, about rights for same-sex couples, about foreign policy, and also about taxes and education. So again, our goal was to investigate under what circumstances would voters sacrifice democratic norms and principles. So, because this is a trade-off here, and something that people are faced with in everyday life. So they never ask you to support democracy, only democracy. They always ask you, maybe, you know, this candidate offers me something else, so what do I cherish more, policy interest or democracy? And then we see that in Hungary, the Hungarians would sacrifice democracy, at least their willingness is the strongest when we ask them about issues like immigration and LGBT rights, and also especially those who opposed immigration and the rights for same-sex couples. So, okay, you can have here different explanations, but my explanation is that this is the effect of the narrative according to which immigrants and LGBT community are a threat to the nation, because Orban and Fidesz were spreading this narrative very, 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 very much. Then also because, again, for them, the stakes are much higher. It's not only about different policies, it's also about protecting the nation. So I think that we see these differences precisely because as a result of this narrative. In Poland, they are even more I would say, obvious, because we see here that in Poland, only those in Poles would sacrifice democracy only for one issue, and this is LGBT rights, so same-sex couples rights. And only those Poles who would oppose those rights, not those Poles who would grant those rights. So again, I think that this is also, again, the result of this narrative of Kaczynski and PiS, according to which LGBT community is a threat to the Polish values and Polish traditions and, in a sense, to the Polish nation. However, you may very legitimately ask me, so why not immigration in Poland? So, because, as you remember, there was a narrative also that immigrants are a threat to Poland. We see here the role, the Polish example shows clearly the role of political elites, because we've done this survey in November 2021, and Poles started with their anti-immigrant narrative in 2015, and in 2019 they switched to the LGBT issue because of the elections, because in Poland you have parliamentary elections in 2015 and then the other ones in 2019. And Poles thought that immigrants are maybe not such a winning card anymore, so they changed the threat narrative. Orban was much clever. He was always using anti-immigrant card. And in Poland, they haven't. And I think we captured this, because in 2021, immigration was not as salient topic as LGBT community. So, and in Hungary, it was, because, again, Orban, when Orban was pushing anti-LGBT narrative, he was also pushing anti-immigration narrative. And then we capture how political elites actually shape public opinion, and how what political elites are doing has effect on voters' preferences. So, again, we see, I think, evidence that this narrative resonated, and it also affected voters' willingness to defend democracy. However, we have here again the question, and I'm now again analyzing 5 countries. So why, if we have the same mechanism, if we have the same approach, why basically in Israel and in Poland they were not so successful as in Turkey and Serbia and Hungary, in spite of similar attacks? So why is this the case? Well, if you remember, I told you that these countries are very, very different. So the sources of democratic resilience can be very, very, very different. However, I am focusing on the nationalism and this narrative that according to which democracy is subverted with nationalist appeals. And then I only focus on the strategy on the rhetorical strategy, and I only focus on nationalism. And then I find out when I talk with a lot of those actors that were directly involved that there is one big difference between, on one hand, Poland and Israel, and on the other hand, Serbia, Hungary, and Turkey. In Poland and Israel, of course, you had opposition parties and civil society that were strong, but they also done something different. They developed a counter-narrative. And this is something that was very important because, don't forget, these political entrepreneurs, they are saying, they're playing with emotions like fear. So they are saying, our country is under threat, and we are here the only ones who are able to safeguard the country, to save the country, to protect the country. And then, again, if social psychology is right, and I think it is, if this narrative resonates, then people start tolerating things that they wouldn't tolerate otherwise. So how you fight back this narrative? You don't fight it back with policy issues. You fight back this narrative with emotions. And this is what Poles and Israelis have done. Poles in 2023 for the parliamentary elections, and Israelis also, if you remember, those protests against the judicial reform of Netanyahu's government. So again, they developed emotional and very compelling counter-narratives, and it resonated. So in Poland, the narrative was about EU and about democracy. And why this resonated? Because for Poles, belonging to the West is part of their national identity, and they were saying PiS, the back then ruling party, is introducing authoritarianism, and this means we will get kicked out of Europe, and this means we will not belong to the West anymore. This is why we need to remain democratic, and we need to remain part of the EU, because this is also part of our identity as Poles. And it resonated, because you have here, they managed to mobilize also people on the right. And then they went out and voted. So this is why this is very important. In Israel, they've done something similar. They also portrayed the fight for democracy as fight for the nation, because you don't want to allow them to portray themselves, I mean, political entrepreneurs as the sole protectors of the nation, as the sole I would say guardians of the nation. So you need to develop your own counter-argument, your core counter-offer, saying, no, actually, we are the ones who are taking care of the interests of this nation. And this is also what the Israelis have done, but on the level of civil society. So they are saying that we are here protesting against judicial reform because this would mean introducing authoritarianism that is alien to our national identity. And this is why they were able to mobilize so many people also on the right, because in the end it's about mathematics. You also need to mobilize people on the right in order to win the election. And with this appeal related also to the nation and national identity, this seems to work, because again, you are faced with a narrative according to which the nation is under threat, and the radical right is the only force that can save the nation, and you cannot. You need to develop a counter narrative against this. So basically, this is my finding based on also the interviews with these people who from Poland and Israel. And again, and I will finish with this. What I'm trying to do is to show that nationalism matters. We are always somehow surprised with electoral results, like in the US presidential election, and also here in this country with the latest results in the parliamentary election. And we somehow do not understand what's going on, because we need, and I think we need to rethink our approaches, and we need to think about new explanatory framers to counter this, I would say, the very, very worrying trend. And I think that by embracing a liberal nationalism, it should be one way, because for a long time we kind of thought that there is only one nationalism, meaning ethnic nationalism, and we forgot that liberal nationalism that is very inclusive, pluralistic, and also involves a fight for democracy could be also a winning platform. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Filip, thank you very much. Those were three big questions, quite ambitious ones. And I think 3 very convincing answers, also mastering plenty of empirical evidence. Thanks a lot for that. And we now proceed to questions. So I anticipate quite a few of them, so that's why we always bundle them into 3. So you have to take note and everything, and perhaps we're going to start with the gentleman in the front.
Thank you for the thought-provoking presentation. I'm just looking for some clarification of terminology, because sometimes when I heard you using phrases like political entrepreneurs, it sounded to me like you were describing populists. Or when at the end, when you talked about ethnic nationalism versus liberal nationalism, I would contrast ethnic nationalism with civic nationalism. And so I'm wondering if you could clarify that, and also in the use of the term liberal with regard to democracy. Sometimes it's contrasted with illiberal democracy, but which is both are ambiguous. Illiberal in particular is very ambiguous and often used by would-be authoritarian leaders. But perhaps they're able to use it that way because we don't define liberal democracy effectively, taking into account the constraints that it has, so that those who argue for majoritarian democracy are actually able to make the better case, the more emotionally appealing case, because they are claiming to speak for the that the people should rule, the nation should rule, the majority should, and those who argue for liberal democracy are not able to counter that by saying, well, democracy requires certain constraints. So it's a long question, but essentially definition of terms.
Thank you very much. No, it's a very good question. Yes, please.
What I would like to know is, thank you for your interesting presentation. What I would like to know is, how do these countries define nation? Whom do they consider in? Whom do they consider out? Is it people who speak the same language are in, or who have the citizenship? This is what I would like to know.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very somber view on the issue. I start with a quote by Anne Applebaum: "Democracies can die, and if history is anything to go by, all eventually will." Let me put an example, perhaps from my own country, Austria. 30 years ago, we were in a crisis, the first energy crisis. It was no problem, big problem to tackle the issue. Every day, cars could be used only every second day and so on. And it was no big problem. The population accepted it. Today, even minor things like vaccination is conceived as a unjustified interference in individual liberty. It is this, you termed it individualization. I think that basically it was the idea that the people should be freer and freer and freer. And this is to the detriment of, as you remarked, to the community ties. What they have witnessed, and it has been accelerated in the COVID crisis, was actually the communal attachment to various groups, basic groups. Shoes, the religious, the parties, and so on. So I think it accelerated. I don't know, but basically, and the second thing is that basically this individualization favors a type of politician who is a salesman. I mean, isn't it incredible that if you take the leading politicians in last Berlusconi in Italy, Johnson in United Kingdom, now this absolute dangerous clown Trump in the United States. I mean, or even here in Austria, Kickl, with any political substance. But so those two issues seem to be connected. The waning of communality and the communal ties on one hand, and the emergence of politicians that simply sell to the lowest bidder.
Thank you. We're done with the first bundle, Philip.
So, thanks for these very, very, very inspiring questions. And I'll just start with yours. I fully agree. I think democracies can die. So, and this is in many societies. I would say also here in Austria that people cannot fathom that democracy can die. It can die because we see the cases in many countries where a democracy has been attacked and it was subverted. So, but somehow there is still not so much awareness that democracy can die, that even an established democracy can die, but it can. And one way it can die is that people start thinking that some other interests are more important for them than democracy. And I think we underestimate this because we have a lot of evidence that in many cases people chose economic interest or some identity interest over democratic norms and principles. So they are not forever in love with democracy. So we need to be aware of it. And I think those politicians you mentioned, like Trump and Kickl, I think honestly sometimes. I think we can learn from them because I think unfortunately they are doing a very good job because their narrative is very clear and very understandable and not abstract, and they are appealing to these emotions to convince people that actually for them it's better if they sacrifice democracy because they are offering them something which is better, which is of course not better, but this is how they are framing it. So for example. We've seen in these surveys that we've done that many people are open to these trade-offs, and so again, in an established democracy like Austria, people will not accept that politicians purge judiciary. But if Kickl is elected and he says, "I'm gonna deal with immigration," and then the courts stop him because he's doing something that is illegal, and then he's gonna say, "Courts are not allowing me to deal with the immigration issue. This is why I need to purge courts to abolish independent judiciary in order to deal with immigration." And many people will accept this. So we see this in many surveys, and we see this also in other countries where this actually happened. So again, people are willing to do these trade-offs, and these politicians are very, very, very savvy in doing it. Another example in the United States now, you see how Trump is attacking the checks on his power, especially the administration, by purging a lot of them. And then, you know what he is doing is he's saying we saved 400 or 200 billion euros in taxpayers' money, and people are only. And then even today he said, or Musk said, we are going to give every American $5,000 because we saved so much money. So they are not paying attention that he fired 17 inspectors there who are there to check, to act as a check on his power. So this is how they are doing it. So there is always a trade-off here, and there is always a clear narrative. So people focus on one issue and kind of ignore the other.
But the question is, why wasn't this the case 30 years ago? Is there something in the process of being democratic? Very point. Is there something in the process of being democratic that weakens democracy?
Yes, it is. And what I mean by it is because the definition of democracy now and 30 years ago is a different one. So, because 30 years ago, 40 years ago, we focused very much on the electoral part of democracy. And in the last 30, 40 years, definition of democracy expanded. And I think it's a good thing that we included this liberal parts of liberal elements of democracy in the definition of democracy, meaning the independent judiciary and also many civil liberties that were not granted 30 or 40 years ago. However, what's problematic here that this has been done mainly without consultation with the wider society. So this was done mainly from the top down. So people were not involved in these issues. So nobody was explaining to them why it's actually good for them that you have very active courts. Why it's actually good for them that you have strong civil liberties. They were not convinced. And now, when these elements are under attack, they are not defending them because they are not convinced that this is the part of democracy. Because if you look at many surveys, you will see many people, they think democracy are elections. So, and as long as they can go out and vote, they think democracy is fine. So, and this is a problem because many do not see that strong independent courts are an essential part of a liberal democracy. This is why they are not defending courts when courts are attacked, because we made these mistakes. We did not persuade them enough that you cannot have a proper democracy without media freedom, without independent courts, and different civil liberties. Democracy is not only elections. However, I then come to your questions about majoritarian democracy. Again, they have a very nice narrative saying, we won the election, we are the majority in the parliament, so we have the legitimacy here to decide what will happen. But of course, democracy is not only the majority in the parliament. Democracy also has so-called counter-majoritarian institutions that are there to protect the rights of minorities. But again, we haven't convinced people enough that these institutions are there and they have a purpose to protect, to safeguard democracy. So this is why this narrative that, you know, in a democracy, majority can decide, it's more appealing to them than this narrative, this other narrative. And what you mentioned in liberal democracy, it's again, I would say that the result of this whole development, because the term, of course, is very much used by Viktor Orban, who is saying we are not against democracy, we are against liberalism. Liberalism means the rights, minority rights, and independent courts. And again, independent media. But again, we need to be more active there. We need to persuade people that these are essential elements of democracy. So, and then they will defend them much more than this is the case. This is the case right now. But again, what I showed in this slide in the beginning of my presentation is how they are connecting these nationalist appeals with majoritarian appeals. Because, and again, come to your other question is about this definition of the nation. So they define, it's actually yours question, sorry. They define nation in a very exclusive way. So they are saying usually those who belong to our ethnic group or to our religious group, they are the ones who belong to the nation. In Hungary, you have it even in the constitution, saying the Hungarian is the one who is Christian. This is why Orban is saying Christian democracy. You know, so this is why he's saying this. And in some other countries, you have this codification of who belongs to the nation, and then they are justifying their I would say anti-minority acts or activities by referring to this exclusive definition of the nation. And what you said about a civic nationalism, yes, this is something that is, of course, you have this dichotomy that is very old between civic and ethnic nationalism. I use the term liberal nationalism because then you can. I would say it's broader, and it could also mean the appeals related to democracy. So because you want to, what we saw, and I only mentioned, for example, Israel and Poland, but I think Brazil is a very interesting case where how Lula defeated Bolsonaro also by saying that democracy is a part of our identity. Democracy is a part of our national narrative, and we need to by fighting for democracy, we are also here fighting for our nation. And this is why I think this is also important that you link these two appeals, because they have a very much more appealing offer. You call them populists, I call them political entrepreneurs. Why political entrepreneurs? Because, of course, it's completely legitimate in political dynamics to to play the nationalist card. Many played the nationalist card before, and they are going to play it in future. But why I call them political entrepreneurs? Because they fabricate threats to the nation. They are fabricating threats to the nation because in this way they can mobilize their supporters more easily, and if they win the election, they can then also subvert democracy without the fear of being punished by their supporters. Again, this is also the definition, because you have these terms that are often quite mixed. Somebody is saying authoritarian populist, somebody is saying radical right, and so on. I differentiate there because I think populists are the ones who are saying that we are representing the people and the threat is there are corrupt elites. In these 5 cases, you saw that the outgroup, the threat has different origins. So it's about, can be an inside actor, can be outside actor. Sometimes it's our minorities, sometimes are even countries, and so on and so on. So this is why I think it's much more promising to call them nationalists than populists, because only in the case of Turkey we saw that secular elites were portrayed as a threat, but in case of other 4 countries there were different entities.
Thank you, and maybe let's make it easy for you, everyone close to you for the time being. Yeah.
My name is Ekaterina Glagoleva. I'm a S2 student. First of all, thank you so much for this insightful lecture. I have a question, actually 2. Today, the growth of right-wing forces is based, among other things, on social networks. And these forces include nationalist, anti-immigrant narratives and others, the ones that you mentioned as well. Have you considered the role of social media in your research? And if yes, what were the findings? And the second question, what is your stance on the role of social media, like social networks, I would say, like TikTok and Instagram or X in the rise of nationalism? Is it the driving force or more the consequences of the state or other actors? Thank you.
Caroline, thank you very much. And then let's just go on. I'll let you choose.
Hello, my name is Maybrit Rosendahl. Thank you very much for your lecture. I'm also a MICE2 student here. My question relates more to something you said at the beginning, that we see less of a proud nationalism and instead a reliance on, democratic buzzwords to maintain legitimacy. And so my question was, do you see a potential that as sort of the final step of this 3-step process that you outlined as supposed 4th step, we will see a return to proud authoritarianism or proud autocratic government?
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Marlene. I'm also a MICE2 student. Thank you for this interesting talk, and I'd like to go back to the kind of like the issues you talked us through earlier, such as immigration and LGBT rights. So I wanted to ask you, what are the most pressing issues driving some democracies toward abandoning democratic principles in today's turbulent times? What will matter in the future? And in other democracies that could be in danger, like, are environmental concerns going to play a role? Is the terrorist threat going to influence some electorates more than others? Thank you.
Thank you. Philip.
Yeah. Social networks, I must say I haven't done much research in this regard, but they are very important, because we see that this narrative that is being spread about the threats to the nation, it's also being spread via social media. And they are, I must say this in a very, very, very plain words, they are killing us there. So basically, with their narrative, with their messages, that is very clear with these words that are very understandable. So, for example, let's talk about immigration. When they talk about immigration, they are saying, they're talking about this replacement of the population. They are talking about, they're calling immigrants message techer. How do you translate this? Knife stabbers. So they have these very clear terms that they always use to describe immigrants. when we talk about immigration, we are saying immigration is good for our economy and it's good for our society. But what does that mean really? Because you need to have much clearer message to show people that how is their daily life improved by immigration. And somehow people a lot of progressives are afraid of this, and also they cannot find the right words. When I'm in Germany, I always ask audience, do you remember who invented BioNTech vaccines? So there were 2 Turkish immigrants who saved so many lives. But people are forgetting these stories. And again, to go back to social media, I think they play a very, very important role. But what I think it's also very important is that these far-right parties and far-right actors, they cooperate very much. So what I learned from my interviews is that there is a lot of cooperation there. They exchange also experiences and strategies and so on. The other side is not cooperating very much, I'm afraid. And this is something that we need to do a lot. And the other thing is, what I've always find, and it's really, really striking, is that a lot of progressive actors, they show a certain arrogance when they are. And what do I mean by this is that Herbert Kickl here, he openly says he's going to go to Hungary to learn from Orban. J.D. Vance also says Hungary is a role model for us. Alice Weidel went to see the head of the Alternative for Germany. She went to Budapest and said Hungary is a role model for us. Have you ever heard a single Western European politician saying, I'm going to go to Bulgaria and Romania to learn there something, how to fight back? No, you will never find such a statement. Because they think that they cannot learn from these countries, because they think that we are different, meaning we are better. And the other guys, they don't think they are better. They think they can learn from each other, and this is their advantage. I would say. And what you said about being proud or authoritarian, I don't think that they will ever say this, because democracy is now very much cherished by many people, even though we sometimes, depending on the region of the world, you will hear different definition of democracy. Because there are surveys in China, and when they ask Chinese which country has the most perfect democracy, they are saying majority is saying China. Because democracy is also something that is differently defined in many regions of the world. So that's why they will never say they are proud authoritarians. They will, of course, their actions will be very authoritarian, but they will always say they are enhancing democracy and they are improving democracy. Regarding the issues for which voters would sacrifice democracy, mainly identity-related issues, because we see socioeconomic issues play much less important role than identity-related issues. And what do I mean? Not only immigration, but for example, in some countries, we also tested the language issue, like in Spain, where we have this minority languages issue, and we saw that these issues that are related to identity, those are the issues, I guess, because they generate a lot of emotions. And these are the issues for which voters would sacrifice democracy.
Thank you, Philip. Then, wow, we have so many hands still up. Let's just do one last round, and everyone perhaps very, very briefly. So it's going to be more than 3. I'm sorry about it.
Yeah,
Let's
sure.
go from the back and then to the front.
My name is Adriana, and I have a question because you mentioned that we need to learn from Donald Trump. So my punctual question is, what lessons can be learned from the cases of Poland and Hungary about the subversion of democracy?
Thank you.
Yes, my name is Rick from the U.S. 2 quick comments. One, there's really no such thing as an independent media or an independent judiciary. They're all sort of subject to political whims to one extent or the other. It's just a question of how extreme. I'm kind of wondering why this talk is a threat to democracy and not really called a threat to the establishment or the threat to the status quo. When the people vote, democracy is a messy thing if they vote, and they vote a certain way. I think you have to accept that to a large degree, unless there's tanks in the street or somebody is suspending the Constitution or creating martial law. I think that's something that we have to live with. And I think what is going on in Europe, which is happening in the US as well, is there is a change afoot. People are frustrated, and the people who have been running things in some countries more than others, the people have said, we've had enough, we need to change, have a little bit of change here. And I don't know who said that a little revolution now and then is a good thing. So, and we saw that in the era when the Soviet states were kicked out too. That was a threat to somebody, somewhere. So just your comments on that. Thank you.
That's a very interesting question. Wow. Let's just keep on going to the front. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Fiona, and I'm also a student at the Academy. You've emphasized now many times that leaders nowadays emphasize their adherence to democracy. Now I had to think of the example of the election campaign in the US, and J.D. Vance openly stating that he would support wrong and fake narratives if it supports his political agenda. Now that was just an example of Springfield that I had to think of. Now it seems like that we've reached a new level of the comfortable use of misinformation by political actors. And I'd like to know, especially if it's coming from a place like the United States that's historically been a champion of democratic values, is there any research that you've done on spillover effects? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, hello, my name is Denise. I'm also a student here at the Academy. And because you briefly mentioned now Herbert Kickl in Austria, I would be interested if you have any specific strategies or recommendations on how liberal parties in Austria could communicate their narratives a bit more effective.
Thank you. And then we have two more. Thanks a lot, by the way, for being here.
Hi, I'm Etia, one student at the Academy. I wanted to ask about the specific instruments that, for example, countries that are going through those narratives right now, those issues, how can the citizens themselves develop effective counter-narratives? For example, take the lessons from Poland or even Israel, for instance. What specific instruments can they use? Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you for today's presentations about the democracies. And my name is Wallace, and also my two students here from the Diplomatic Academy from Hong Kong. So my question is because you mentioned about the concept and also the trend. So do you personally believe that there's 100% fully democratic countries in our world? If no, do you think that the downfall of democratic movement is actually unavoidable in our world? Thank you.
Thank you, Wallace. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Markus Stilling. I'm a student here at the Diplomatic Academy, and I wanted to ask, given about the counter-narratives, how sustainable do you think counter-narratives that also appeal to emotion are, and do you think they detract from public discourse?
Thank you. And you had your hand up for quite a while. Yes.
This was not mentioned yet. Yeah. Very short question. It's about election participation. You did not say this, for instance, in Serbia, election participation was partly very low. So if the election participation, for instance, is below 50%, so and there is still a party, of course, which gets the majority and thus can stay in power. But how representative is this party then? Because it may have from all the electorate only something like 20–30%.
Thank you.
Manipulation, of course, of election participation. So it may be sometimes interesting for the authoritarian regime to get a high election participation to show that they are democratic. That's in Russia the case, for instance, or Belarus. Now, because if the election participation is below 50%, their legitimacy is much lower. But in Serbia, obviously, it didn't disturb the ruling elite.
Thank you, Philip. Now you have a lot to answer. Yeah. I leave it up to you whether you go question by question or whether you put together a few things.
I must apologize in advance if I forget something, but please, then you can approach me afterwards, and I'm happy to answer, because there are a lot of questions. So let's start with the counter-narrative. I think, well, I'm not gonna, do a, what do you say, like advertise my own work, but I wrote a piece for Standard, and it's gonna be out on Monday exactly on this issue. What? Because we are expecting that AfD in Germany will get a lot of votes. So, and there will be another victory for the far right. So, and I'm saying that we need to develop counter narrative also based on emotions, and this is how we should counter these parties. But of course, it's also context dependent. So sometimes something that worked in Poland with the EU membership may not work in other countries. So each country would have to identify the issues that are promising as a basis around which an emotional narrative will be developed. But however, I think that this is the only way, because countering, you need a narrative that involves emotions. You need to counter it with emotions, because you cannot. In Austria, the threat narrative of FPO was countered with climate bonus of 150 euros. And I don't have anything against climate bonus, but if you think that your country is facing existential threat, 150 euros will not do much. So this is, you need to convince people, no, actually it's not facing existential threat. We are actually doing very good, and we are fighting here, and there is a lot of things to be proud of, but and also, and not just to kind of emulate what the far right is doing. Because if you look at many countries in Europe, whenever there was a tragic incident related to immigrants, there was always the same answer of the established parties: we are going to make laws even more stricter. So in this way, you're only legitimizing the narrative of the far right, because you're not offering anything else. I'm not saying you need to ignore the deficiencies of the immigration system and immigration issue, but you need to offer something else. You need to talk more positively about these issues, and not only to legitimize their narrative. This is something that I think is completely missing. Regarding the tanks on the streets, yes, this used to be. Previously, we know that democracy died when we saw tanks on the streets. This was the way. So coups are still there. Just think of Western Africa, because it happened there. But now it's very ambiguous. Now you don't see tanks on the streets. It's gradual. It happens. It doesn't happen overnight. There is no big spark. And this is why it's more dangerous, because you cannot identify one key happening and you say it started there. No, because it happens. It's very gradual. And I agree, not everything is an attack on democracy, because we need to differentiate here between policies and democratic norms and principles. So if the party is elected that we don't like, this party has the full legitimacy to change many policies. So this is perfectly legitimate. What is not legitimate is to attack democratic norms and principles, to curtail civil liberties, and to purge judiciary from and also to appoint loyalists at the head of independent institutions. So this is something that is problematic. But every party or president or who is elected, they have a full legitimacy to implement their policies, but not not at the expense of democratic norms and principles. So this would be my clarification. Regarding electoral participation, yes, but this is also a problem in many democracies, that you have such that the voter turnout is not as high as we would like it to be, and of course this affects legitimacy of government. So I agree with you on this, and I think we need to do much more to convince people to get out and vote, because this is very important. And one also, what you asked me about, is there a perfect democracy? of course not. Even though I spend a lot of time in Sweden, and I cannot even say that Sweden is a perfect democracy. So no, there is no perfect democracy. There are of course deficiencies, but so we are talking about the level of democratic development. There will never be a perfect democracy for sure. But some democracies are more robust than others. And just seeing about some. I hope I answered all questions. So, but if not, please let me know. So,
Filip, thank you very much. Is that shorthand that you use there, or is that?
Is what?
Is that shorthand? Or is
exactly.
All right,
exactly.
Because he has all the answers in something like in one line. These
no, they are only
very sophisticated.
No. I wish I had all answers.
No. So thank you very much for your questions, for your comments. It was a very lively debate. That's always very appreciated. Filip, thank you very, very much for being here, giving us a great talk, and answering so many questions. Thanks a lot.